Then welcome. My clock says 19:50. So in my time, somewhere in Germany, it's the early or evening. But wherever you are, I hope you're fine and great. Welcome to my talk today about server to cloud migration tips. My name is Barbara. I'm a technical consulting at Decadis, an Atlassian solution and marketplace partner from Germany. And today I'll talk about both Jira and Confluence server to cloud migration. And I have a short agenda prepared. I'll talk both a little bit introductory about the cloud migration phases you'll typically go through in your cloud migration project, and also the possible cloud migration strategies and methods you would be following when going along. And then I go a little bit more into the experience part of it, talking about the biggest challenges you will typically encounter, and then some tips and helpful tools to help you deal with those challenges. And at the end, I'll also introduce a new feature from our in-house, the automatic migration of our flagship app, Jira Workflow Toolbox. What's not included in this agenda, but is definitely planned into the session time, is at the very end, there will be time, probably about 10 minutes for question and answers. So if there are for some of the topics during the talk, there are some questions for you coming up, then feel free to post them in the chat. And my colleague who's here today, Alex, he will help me in the end and read them to me to sift through them and get the most important question answered. And yeah, so let's get started. Why am I holding this talk today? Well, cloud migration projects are a little bit unique in the way that most will do such a project. Most of the Atlassian users, Jira users or Confluence users will do such a project exactly once, because they will not migrate from server to cloud or from data center to cloud more than once, because after they're in the cloud, they will probably stay there. So as we all know, if we do something the first time, you probably not do it like the optimal way. So as this is something you will probably do only once, this is predestined that you will run into some problems where in the end you will think, man, I could have done this better, but you'll never do it again. So that's why I thought I would take a few of those experiences that we as consultants, where we do those projects with multiple customers, can collect over the multiple tries and share them with you, so you'll have the chance to do it the best way the first time and only time you will do it. So what does a cloud migration project entail? Well, you might think, well, cloud migration, that's like a one-time thing. So whatever, you plan your migration day and then you migrate and then it is. But actually the cloud migration project goes over a little bit more than that. It's a longer process, and you can put it into some phases, which are also now the phase I present you today align with the phases how Atlassian sees them and their supporting material. And the very first thing you will probably do in a cloud migration project before you do anything is to first assess, which basically means that you look and take a very good look at your instance and everything you have there. So how many projects you have and how they're organized, how many users you have and how you have your user management organized, what apps you have, how your usage of your apps is. And also basically you will look, how is my instance looking right now? And you will think about, okay, how do I want my instance to look in the cloud? And then you have the assessment, and based on this a little bit of sub details, but based on these 2 points, you can then think about, okay, how can I move from where I am right now to where I want to be and how I want it to be in the cloud? And depending on some different, some of the conditions, you'll choose a different migration method maybe, or choose different tools, or may decide to take or not take some apps with you into the cloud and all that stuff. So that's basically the next thing you'll do. You can then when you have assessed your instance and know, okay, which projects you wanted to move into the cloud, how you want to do your user management in the cloud, which apps you will want to use in the cloud. Maybe some of the apps that you have on server don't even have cloud versions. Maybe you decide that you actually, during the assessment, that you actually don't really use some of them, so you scratch them from your list to save some money. Then you can better plan on how much prepare work there might be to do, depending on whether you want to clean up a little bit or move out some apps, stuff like that. Then you can do a time plan for your migration plan, basically put your migration team together, plan with who to test, maybe an order of projects to be migrated, all that stuff. And then you can get into the actual nitty-gritty stuff of the prep work for the migration, where, for example, some apps might need additional like pre-migration work to be done. All the prep work will also include like basically first setting up your cloud instance so that you have something that you can migrate to, maybe and all the cleanup work you want to do in your server instance beforehand. And then the very important step that you should not, please not skip, is actually do test migrations. It does not necessarily have to be like a complete full migration of everything, but you will at least want to migrate some projects. And also very important in this testing is to don't just do it like on like just a purely technical basis, but also include your key users here, so that they see how that you can better see their challenges in the new cloud environment. But hopefully this testing will help you to like find some more kinks that you maybe have not planned and prepped for yet, so you can plan and prep for those, so that your actual migration on your big migration day goes smoothly. And then one could think this is the end of your migration project, but actually very, very important part also comes after the migration, where you support your users in the new environment, basically help them get a smooth start after you migrated into the cloud. So your migration project does not end on migration day. So these are the typical phases that you will go through in your migration project, and every single one of those phases is important. And that's probably one of the first tips, to like not think of any of those phases as not that important, because everything gives you valuable input so that your actual whole migration runs smoothly in the end. So I mentioned that during the assessment phase, depending on how your server instance looks like, on what your goals are with your cloud instance, there might be different strategies that you might follow. So what are those strategies? There are, Atlassian sees like generally 4 strategies, and I think it's easier to see what they mean if you think what your stakeholder or you might be saying about your cloud migration, what your motivation is with your cloud migration. Maybe you're saying, actually my licenses have already run out. I just want everything in the cloud as soon as possible. Please, better we would have migrated like half a year ago. That's a valid motivation, and a probably not so rare one. But maybe you have a little bit of time and you say, well, let us clean up a bit first, like take the chance to clean up, maybe reduce, like get some old users out that we don't really, that are not really active anymore, maybe get rid of some apps that we're not really using, so that our cloud instance is cleaner and faster and also cheaper. And cheap is probably the one thing you want to bring up the most when talking with like your stakeholders in a higher management level. If you take the time to clean up, you can identify maybe apps that you no longer need, or identified users that are no longer active, and get everything smoother. Another thing, especially in big environments or environments where the user base is not that open to change, let's say it that way, there might be a big motivation to do a phase, like do it step by step, maybe migrate a single project first as like a pilot migration project, so that there can be some experience collected in the cloud in daily business over a while before the rest of the instance is migrated. And this, of course, is only really possible if you have projects that work independent of each other. So if you have a lot of projects, but all of them have like issues in between each other linked and stuff like that, then doing this phase by phase, project by project, or in Confluence space by space kind of migration a little bit more complicated. So you need to have like project or a space or a set of project spaces that form a good independent bubble, so that you don't get like data drift between your instances in your phases. And the last way to go about is to say, well, we actually have like most of the stuff that we have on our server instance is more like archive material, and we want to just start with a clean slate and just build everything from new in the cloud, which is not really migration from a technical standpoint in itself. And for each of those approaches and each of those ideas, there is a migration strategy in the Atlassian documentation or name. The one is the lift and shift, where you basically just take everything and move it, which is the fastest way. But yeah, then you probably might get a cluttered cloud instance. The other and the recommended way, if you have the time for it, is the optimize and shift. The step-by-step is called the phased approach, which I mentioned needs a little bit of a good prerequisites for it. And the last way would be called the restart in the cloud. And all those strategies, of course, you have to like do it some way. So there are different migration methods or tools to go about it. And I would group them into generally three ways. The first and probably most likely way you'll migrate is using the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant, or the free and easy way, the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant, or Confluence Cloud Migration Assistant. In the case of Confluence, is a free tool provided by Atlassian. And if you have like a very up-to-date Jira or Cloud instance on your server, then it's probably already installed. Maybe you didn't even notice it. And this free tool will give you the option, give you the possibility to connect your server or data center instance to a cloud instance and assess apps and run the migration, both all at once or in phases. So it is suited to all of the first of the three migration strategies. If you restart, of course, then you might not really need it, or you could then use it, for example, to just migrate users. The other option is a site import, where you just use the site export functionality of Jira and Confluence and then use site import in the cloud. But this is limited to big instances. And of course, this also doesn't then really work with like a phased approach, because then you would have to, then you can't use the whole site import. But for site import, there is a limit, like you have to have an instance with at least 1,000 users so that you can actually use site import. And the third option, which might be if the Jira Cloud Migration System is maybe a little bit too streamlined for you, is there are third-party apps on the marketplace, and that have additional features that basically are cloud migration systems like the Jira Cloud Migration System with, for example, more granular control about what to migrate or more intense feedback. And those are typically specialized on very big and very complex instances where the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant isn't detailed enough in the feedback and configuration area. So these are the typical phases you go through and the methods and strategies you use, and ask question, what are the biggest challenges you will encounter? And one of the biggest challenges, especially if you go with the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant, but also with all the other ways, with other apps, is that there are migration limitations. So, for example, if the Cloud Migration Assistant, dashboards are not migrated, or boards like Kanban boards that go over multiple projects, because the approach of the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant is a very project-based approach from the programming logic behind it. And since dashboards and cross-project Kanban boards, for example, are not really associated with the project, they get left behind. But there are also, for example, limitations that in Jira Service Management projects, if you have more than 50 queues, only 50 get migrated. And then there are, of course, apps limitations with regard to apps, and that's probably the biggest part of it. We all know and love the customization options that the app marketplace gives us, so that basically each and every Jira or Confluence instance probably looks a little bit different because there's a different set of apps installed. But some of those either don't exist in the cloud or work differently in the cloud, and are not necessarily migrated automatically. Since a little bit more than a year, the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant includes a way to migrate app data or app configuration automatically, but depending on the app, this might not be implemented yet. Or if the app simply does not exist in the cloud, then you can't migrate it. So basically going through your list of apps, checking how they're used and whether they are, how they work in the cloud, that's probably the part of the migration where you have to plan the most time for, especially if you have a lot of apps. But luckily, most app vendors provide migration paths and guides to help you along with that. And the third thing, the third biggest challenge that you'll have encounter is time, because probably someone will rush you or try to rush you along. There might be a date set, or the licenses might run out. So for the whole project, time might be an issue, but also like the migration on migration day itself just takes time, because moving all that data just takes a while. So that's a challenge you will encounter. And the fourth one is basically the human factor, is acceptance, because some of your users might not like the change to cloud because something looks different. And if something looks different, then the first reaction might be, don't like it. Why isn't it as it was before? So for both time and acceptance, testing is very, very, very important, because if you include your users early and basically make them feel included by including them in the testing, warning them early enough that the migration will happen, and not just basically sending an email, by the way, next week is migration day, then we'll be in the cloud, will help tons of that. The most important thing to ensure acceptance of your user base is usually to include your users, because what most people just don't like is basically things being decided without informing them and asking them. So include your users in the migration project as much as possible, or as reasonably possible, especially in the testing. So some of those are already mentioned, but I'll basically go through a few points of advice that help with those challenges. These are a little bit more general, but I get a slide later, I will get into more concrete tools and resources that will help you. So if this is a little bit too vague for you, there's something a little bit more detailed coming later. So the first thing is basically that you already started with coming to this talk, is be aware and be prepared. I think the biggest problem, the first step to overcome a challenge is be aware that this challenge exists, and then you can take steps to avoid it becoming a real problem. So especially in the one of the biggest challenges, the app department, just being aware that apps might work differently in the cloud is the first step to then go check and plan what the actual differences are, which differ from app to app. And then if you know about it, then you can deal with it. For some apps or some of the migration limitations, there might not be a perfect solution, but you can find the best solution possible. But as long as you don't get blindsided by those challenges, the biggest problem is already solved. And the second best advice I can give you is to ask for help. You don't have to be afraid. And now I'll maybe give you a little secret, or not really a little secret, but if you think about it just for a moment, you'll notice that everyone involved wants you to succeed. Atlassian wants you to be able to move into the cloud smoothly, because you see, when you see where all the new features come, they all come to cloud first. And Atlassian has said again and again that cloud is the focus for the new stuff. So Atlassian wants to help you, and that's why they have specific support resources to help you along. And they can also stretch some of the limitations that I mentioned earlier, if you ask nicely. For example, the problem with the maximum of 50 queues per Jira Service Management project. If you ask the Atlassian support nicely, they can stretch those limits for you. And the same is true for all the vendors of your apps. If you have apps in your systems, then you're the customer of those vendors. And the app vendors, they want to keep you as customers. So they will do the best they can to help you to migrate their apps to the cloud and still be a customer after your migration. So all of them will probably be very helpful if you contact their support, and most of them also have extensive documentation or are working hard on integrating automatic cloud migration. So basically everyone else wants to help and see you succeed. So use that to your advantage. And if you think that you see that your project is a especially complicated one, you can also contact an Atlassian solution partner in your area to just guide you through the process and learn from there and utilize their experience. And the third tip, which I cannot reiterate enough, is to test properly. This will help with all the challenges I mentioned before. With if you do test migrations, you are prepared time-wise on how long such a migration will take on migration day. If you include your users in the testing, this will help with acceptance. If you test all the app functionality in the cloud properly, you know whether you got the specific test steps necessary for the app migrations down correctly. And the testing will help with all the challenges mentioned before. And the last tip that I can give you, just to try and take your time because from my experience, especially with the topic of acceptance and including your user base, is much easier if you have a smooth migration. So a smooth migration is usually better than a fast migration. So if it takes 3 months longer, but it works properly like a charm from migration on, then this is better for your long-term satisfaction of your users than if they get the change 3 months earlier. Because basically changing to the cloud is like the migration project is their first contact. It's the first impression of the version, the cloud that your your users will have, and we all know how important first impressions are. So if you follow those tips, I think you will have no problems to succeed and be able to just open a bottle of champagne and clink glasses on migration day. So this is the more general information, but there are also a lot of concrete helpful tools and resources along the way to help you. So one is from Atlassian itself. Atlassian has like a huge migration hub with guides, with an exact list of what does and does not migrate if you use the cloud migration system, both for Jira and Confluence. So the dashboards and cross-project boards I mentioned are just examples. But there's a very detailed list of which components exactly get migrated and not migrated. There are also tips on how to clean up your instance before migration, and more technical pre-migration checklist, such that everything runs smoothly and you don't encounter any big errors on migration itself. And in addition to that, the Jira or Confluence Cloud Migration System as a tool can also help you not only on the day itself, but also with all the app stuff. So it will help you assess your apps, which apps you have. It will offer you, show you if there are cloud versions available, or it can suggest you alternative apps in the cloud. And if there is automatic migration included, this will also work there, but will also include links to the migration paths provided by the vendors. And you can also get some help with instance analysis and cleanup. So in Confluence, you can find in the administration and the general configuration, you can find a list of macro usage. So if you have apps in Confluence and you don't know how that provide like new macros on your Confluence pages and you don't know how much they're used, you can check this by going there, and then you can basically get the list of all the macros and how much and on which pages they are used. And in Jira, there isn't something quite as helpful natively, but in our admin toolbox, there is a workflow report included, which basically does a very similar thing with a little bit more intense detail for workflows. So if you have any apps that include workflow functions like additional validators or additional post functions, and you're not really sure if they're used and where and how much, then this information will inform the effort you will have to put into potentially manual migration of this stuff. Then you can use the workflow report to basically get a look. So if I have an example here of a workflow report, which gives you basically a list of plugins or apps in your Jira instance that include workflow elements, and gives you a list, a number of all the number of how many conditions valid as a post function are used, and you can also filter by those and go through all the workflows to check how exactly they're used there, and which elements and which functions exactly are used, to then analyze which of those to keep, which you maybe do not need, and how to migrate those. And you can also get like a detailed list of all the different, for example, post functions that are in use and where. So this will probably help you if you have maybe one or more apps in use on your Jira instance that are affecting or contained in your workflows. Here you can get a good overview there, so that you don't miss any, or maybe get a good idea of which is not actually used anymore at the real place. And one of those workflow heavy apps that you might have on your system is the Jira Workflow Toolbox. And up till now, there is of course a cloud version available, but up to now you basically had to manually recreate a lot of the workflow functionality in the cloud, but coming soon is the beta for the inclusions of the Jira workflow toolbox in the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant automatic cloud migration program. So if you're interested in joining because you're just right now looking at migrating and have our app included, you can contact our support on information. And this automatic migration identifies and migrates the most used workflow functions automatically. So it doesn't have 100% coverage yet, but it does give you extensive feedback about the results, what got what got automatically migrated, and what manual post-processing is still left. So it will greatly reduce the manual work on migrating this app. And if some of your favorites are not covered, or some of those that you're using, our documentation basically includes an extensive guide on how to do the rest. One thing to mind there is, and that's because of the architecture difference between cloud and server, that some features, although we'd love to have, like, of course, the same feature set in cloud and server, are simply just not possible in the cloud because of the different ways for apps to communicate with Jira in server and cloud. So if you're interested to join, we of course want your feedback. So if something's not working or you love a certain feature, of course, let us know by contacting our awesome support team. So that's it for my talk on my infos about cloud migration in general and our new feature of automatic cloud migration for Jira Workflow Toolbox. So now I still have, not quite 10 minutes time for questions from the audience. So I think Alex had the time during the talk. I saw there was a lot of activity in chat, but I didn't get to read it yet. But I think Alex has compiled a small list maybe of questions to throw at me.
In fact, I did, yes, of course. And let me just, from the first one, we did chronologically. How to convince a leadership to invest in cleanup? Tajid is asking.
Well, I think I talked about it already during the talk, but let's be real. Leadership is easiest to convince with numbers or with money, so one thing that the cleanup will help with is the performance of your cloud instance, but the other thing that is like a very real possibility of your cleanup is a reduction in cost, because you might notice that there is especially apps that you might no longer be really using, or things where you maybe have like 2 different apps that do similar things that you can consolidate, and that's like can be like a real money saver in the cloud. And also, if you, depending on how you do your user management, if you are not that diligent usually about having your user base cleaned up in server, because you have like a big license limit and you're not that close to it, if you switch to monthly billing in the cloud, then you have real per user billing. So cleaning up there to only have really that as those users in the cloud that are actually using your product can also save real money.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. There's another question, a more technical one. Since Jira Cloud doesn't have single sign-on, so bypass URL as in Jira Server, what is the best way to ensure access to the instance if SSO configuration fails?
That's less of a migration question, I think, and more a Jira Cloud question in general. So of course, one way maybe to is to include like a user in your instance, because like your single sign-on is usually connected to your managed domain, right? And your domain-based users. So if you just include one basic backup admin user on the side, you can then at least ensure that you are not like completely locked out of the system if you have this one user on the side with admin admin rights that can does not fall under single sign-on. That's probably the best way to build a safeguard for that.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. The next question is from Piyush. With a position to do Jira Server to cloud migration, we should always check for something new always. Each migration would be 100%, but one should think that it was 99% and 1% is remaining. That 1% refers to brush up the process of migration each time to make it better next time.
Yeah, I mean, I'm not quite sure what the actual question is here, but I agree with the sentiment that even if you do migration multiple times, as you might do as a solution partner or consultant, there will always, because the Atlassian ecosystem is changing so fast, there will always be something new, maybe a new improvement in the migration assistant or a new feature in the cloud. So that there is something new to learn from each migration.
Okay, Piyush just added in chat that was a saying, but 1% is what you think would be. Okay, let's probably get to another question. Brian is asking, what version of Jira Server or Data Center would you recommend an instance to be on prior to migration, if they're currently on an older version prior to having Jira Cloud Migration Assistant?
Well, there is a minimum version that you'll need to be for the Jira Cloud Migration Assistant to work. I don't know the exact number from the top of my head. I think it's no, I'm not quite sure, but it's in the documentation. It's in the migration guide, definitely. So that's of course the one you will have to be on if you want to use the cloud migration assistant. If your if your customer is not willing to invest in new license to be able to upgrade to that version, then of course you can basically only work with site import instead. But well, best of course is to be like on an as recent version as possible. But yeah, to use the cloud migration at all, you just need to have a specific version that's basically the system requirement to use it, and then it should work fine. Of course, like upgrading is always nice, but you don't have to upgrade beyond the version. That's the minimum requirement for Jira Cloud Migration System.
Okay, there is a command in chat which states that the Jira Server or Jira Data Center version has to be 7.6.0 or later. So that's the minimum requirement.
Yeah. Then I'll believe chat in that regard.
I'm forced to believe them as well. I'm just a developer, not a consultant. So yes. Thank you, chat. Okay, another interesting question is, do you have any names for the third-party apps that can be researched when helping migrating the data? I'm aware of Configuration Manager, would love to hear thoughts on that one, but I haven't heard of any other.
Yeah, I'm also right now, from the top of my head, only aware of the Configuration Manager from AppFire. While I have worked with the Configuration Manager on like in the previous or original application on server, like to migrate stuff from a test or staging instance to productive. I have not yet needed to use the configuration manager app for a cloud migration. But I heard they're like also actively trying to involve app vendors to include some app migrations in their project. So I would probably, when like deciding on what to use, make it like most, focus probably on what saves the most work concerning app migration.
Okay. Thank you, Barbara. We got 4 minutes to go and 4 more questions. So the next question from Divya, can you mention about your marketplace apps that are available for migrations?
Our marketplace, some of the apps that we have don't really need a migration per se. For example, we have in Confluence, we have the Space Tools Pro or Space Admin, and that's, for example, is a tool that does not affect pages. So this migrates completely easily, smoothly. You just have to include it in the cloud instance, and that's basically it. For our flagship app, the Jira Workflow Toolbox, we have which on server includes like a lot of different features. Besides the workflow functions, for example, it includes something that's called calculated fields, where you can code basically a little bit of custom fields. We have in the cloud moved those a little bit into different packets. So we have a separate app called Smart Fields there if you're only basically just using that feature, which provides some of that calculated field functionality. But yeah, Jira Workflow Toolbox is the one that I mentioned in the talk, which migrates, will include automatic migration soon.
Thank you, Barbara. Next question from Mark. I haven't heard much about training building familiarity with differences between data center and cloud to help end users make a smooth transition. Does this go with communication to end users, or are there any tips you might have in this area as well? So
the biggest challenge that I probably see there in basically the changes for users is the UI changes in the view for issues, so that the issue view looks a little bit different in the cloud, and also how the workflow transitions are built in there. So this is something, because this is probably one of the biggest parts of the daily work, like the screens they will see the most. This is something that I would focus on in the communication with the end users to help them transition smoothly. But something that's will also maybe help in the communication with the end users to give them, basically to motivate them with a few of the nice new features they might have. For example, the simple roadmap feature that's not included in Jira Server, which will maybe a good way to something nice to show and motivate your team leaders that want to have like a good overview on their project about the cool new features in the cloud. So basically balance the changes that they will have to encounter and that they will have to deal with the few of the new features. But what exactly there is most attractive for your users, of course, depends on which features they're using right now.
Okay, we got no time left and 3 questions. What do we do then? Do we go through them?
Well, I think the easiest way, we switch to the booth because we're like motivated to keep the time. So you have time to get to the next talks. We'll be here at our booth today and tomorrow. So you can just come visit us at the virtual booth and set up a one-on-one. And if you want to go to all the talks and don't have time to come by the booth, you can also, of course, drop us an email. But if you have the time to come by our booth and say hello, you can make use of our JiraCon promo and get 50% off code for a new license of any X app of your choice if you come by and visit. So I'll probably not be there right now, but later this evening, then you will be able to catch me there.
Okay,
so either come to the booth or see what's going on next in one of the other rooms.
I've copied all the questions, taken them to the booth, so feel free to drop by. Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you for having me, and enjoy JiraCon. Bye.